Hi, everyone. I am so excited for this month's interview and conversation with the two authors from one of the books of my summer reading list, Choosing to See. And let me bring up a framework for equity in the math classroom. So I did decide, I was telling Kyndall and Pam that I did read digitally. I've been transferred over to Kindle, of course, or other apps for books. So that's where I've been enjoying their book this summer. And so I want to introduce Dr. Pam Seda, who's a longtime educator, also owner of Seda Educational Consulting, and also a game creator. So I'm super excited to learn more about that, as well as co-author Dr. Kyndall Brown, also a longtime educator and currently executive director of the California Mathematics Project at UCLA. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. I'm super excited. I know we've been working a lot to find ways and also just the different ways that we're all three of us are connected in the math world. So I'm super, super excited to talk about the book and to have you on Black Girl Math. So one of my first questions I always ask everyone is, what's your math story or your why that led to the writing of Choosing to See?
So I guess I can start. I can say it probably started with me back when I decided to start my PhD program, because it just the gaps and the disparities in how Black and Brown children were not only performing, but how they were thinking about mathematics and the system. And I just wanted to find some answers. So for me, it wasn't good enough to have research that says, okay, here are the disparities. For me, I wanted to find answers. And so the beginning of my PhD program was my desire to find some answers. And this book was kind of like the natural progression. Of course, there was a lot that happened between when I said I want to find some answers in this book, but I can honestly say it was just the book was just a part of that journey of finding answers. Answers weren't always just some research. Some answers came from the kids. Some of the answers came from other teachers. Some of those answers came from my own experience in the classroom. Some of those answers came in having dialogue with Kyndall. So, so that's what I would say was the why behind the book.
Okay, thanks, Pam. Kyndall?
And thank you. Yeah, my why is, I guess, related to, my story as well. Beginning my career as a math educator, I began my career in Los Angeles in the mid 80s at the height of the drug gang epidemic, and in South LA, right in the heart of those communities that were heavily impacted, and always saw the potential and the promise in these students who, even though they were living in some pretty dire circumstances, still had so much potential that wasn't being recognized. And I always felt it was my job as a teacher to do whatever I could to give them the same kind of education that any student, similar to what I received, that propelled me to want to pursue mathematics. I wanted them to have those same kind of experiences. And so part of it was seeking more knowledge to become the best teacher I could be. So deepening my math content knowledge, but also, trying to find out strategies and resources, particularly targeting the communities that I was working with. And so I agree that it's kind of been a part of that lifelong path as an educator. Once I started getting into teacher professional development and teacher education, it was also with this emphasis on access and equity. And what I found throughout my work is that there were very few resources that were targeted specifically towards the math classroom. When we think about language arts, we can talk about, engaging students in the literature that reflects their culture, right? Reading and writing. Or you talk about social studies, you can study the cultures of the students that are in your classroom, but math teachers seem to be at a loss as to how to make a math class more culturally relevant and responsive. And so that to me is the why. There's been all this discussion over the last 20 years about access and equity in the math classroom, but we still are getting the same outcomes, right? And so, I think what we were really trying to do is, here are some practical things that you can do in your classroom on a daily basis to help make your classrooms more equitable and more culturally responsive.
And that's what I love, what you two bring into the book. Really, actually, from the very beginning, are your stories from your classrooms and your own teaching experiences. Because I was also one of those math teachers who I kind of like fell in love with math through just, again, I also taught in South LA, and then also just the opportunities that were given through UCLA. I was telling Kyndall earlier just around like how I, as a young teacher, was just like, hey, I can't necessarily teach it exactly the way I learned mathematics. So, and there was just an opportunity. And so I have some credits from 4th and 5th grade math from UCLA. And so just thinking about how do I build up my expertise to do exactly that, of what I was learning around cultural responsiveness in English language arts, how do I bring that into the mathematics classroom as well? And so based on what you're hearing about the book and any feedback, what's some positive and either negative feedback that you received about the book? Just because around, cultural responsiveness can just become very, very controversial very quickly in some spaces.
So I will say that the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. And what has been really encouraging is how higher ed has really embraced it. So that we've had book studies and we've been guests to college classes. And as you were saying, I've been an invited speaker. Higher ed has just really gravitated towards this because, as you said, there's not really anything out there like it. And so math ed people have been tasked with, okay, well, let's look at the research in these other areas and see how we can apply it to math, which is, of course, what I did in my doctoral program. But teachers don't have time to do all that. So, so yes, definitely, it has been very well received, and we've been very excited about that. Of course, everyone doesn't love it.
Right. I wanted to talk about a negative review on Amazon. Someone said that, it was just a bunch of hogwash and there was really no math in the book and no mathematician had endorsed the book. And so he definitely did not recommend it. He or she definitely did not recommend it. So
we got one negative review, one on Amazon.
I'm gonna have to replace it. I'll have to just go in and put in another positive, because from another book, it's I always think 2 positives to beat the negativity bias, of course, in terms of.
Yeah, well, we have 20 positives and 1 negative there.
Right. And it's interesting because we would expect that kind of pushback. Because I think what we're really talking about is disrupting the status quo, right? That everyone has a right to learn mathematics and to be successful in mathematics, but they may do it in ways that are different than what, the field is used to or expects, right? So, I would expect pushback, right? Because we're really challenging the system.
Yes, we're really challenging that idea. The current system that we have pretty much says, I'm going to teach you and give you this information. And if you didn't get it, then it's because something's wrong with you. And so we're really challenging that notion and saying we as a country can no longer afford to only have 20% of our population master mathematics. Our world has changed too much and we are really shortchanging ourselves if we only give 20% of our people access to higher level mathematics. And so when we say, let's open it up and expand it and give everyone access, what a lot of people hear is, well, let's water it down. Let's cheapen it. Let's dilute it, which if you read the book, we're saying exactly the opposite.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Just, of course, lots and lots of math stories, and you share them in the book around just expectations, or even going into classrooms today, well, before COVID, I should say, and just seeing what expectations are given to students, or how students are given opportunities to opt out. Like, if I don't learn it this way, or if I don't have the right answer right away. And so thinking about the ways that you have incorporated in what's called ICU care framework in the book. And I'm just wondering, how did you develop that? How did you come to that as the focal point in the book?
So the framework, ICU care framework, the actual framework itself came out of my dissertation research. But the framework that I used came out of the multicultural teacher education literature. And after I graduated and finished my dissertation, I was doing presentations and working with teachers in my district. At that time, I was an instructional coach. And one of the teachers in my session said, this is really good stuff, but you need to turn it into an acronym so that we could remember it. So there were always the 7 principles. So I kind of took that as a challenge and worked with it, and out popped ICU care. And I just felt like it really, the acronym itself really captured, the spirit of the fact that the reason why we have to choose to see is because we care. And when we choose not to see, it's because of a lack of care.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What are some, and especially like you said, how powerful the title is, and just even seeing as you work in higher ed in mathematics, or even go into classrooms, of just seeing just the small percentages of Black and Brown students who pursue higher ed mathematics or sciences. And just as you were saying earlier, Pam, just that we can no longer afford to do it because we're not seeing ourselves in these spaces. And so,
Well,
go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Oh, no. I want to hear what you have to say, because my next question is just more around, in the 7 principles, what would it look like if the 7 principles of the ICU care framework was implemented in a school or district? What does that look like for you both?
So I'll start. I would imagine that, you would see classrooms that, first of all, when you walked in, you'd see images that reflect the student population on the walls, right? You would see students working collaboratively to solve problems. You'd be hearing a lot of discourse and dialogue. You would be seeing students using tools, lots of different kinds of tools, as they work through the mathematics. You would be seeing them engaging in mathematical tasks that are related to their lives and their culture. And you would see, I would conjecture that you would see a lot higher student achievement, a lot, you'd see stronger student identities around mathematics, right? And you would see students willing to engage and take risks and make mistakes and share their mistakes and share their thinking, and, kind of like the Culture and Language Academy of Success years ago.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
I could see its implementation on several levels. So let's think about like leadership. Let's say talk about school leadership. I think implementing those principles means that leaders would be looking for success based on these principles. All right, so they're not going to be looking at equity as some theoretical, feel good theory. They're going to be seeing that, okay, this is the lens now which I'm going to look at the systems in my school and look at how the teachers interact with students. It's going to look about how, what are those expectations that we have for ourselves as leaders, expectations we have for teachers. I also see it as a way to frame the dialogue around equity. It's going to be things that we can have specific conversations around. They're going to be things that we can look at. So as we begin to look at how we manage our time, how we manage our resources, we can have that conversation around these principles in the equity framework. And then for teachers, it's just the lens on how I make decisions. So if teachers are looking at this standard and they're considering an activity, the activity will be based on how can I implement this activity in a way so that I include others as experts? How can I release control? How can I be that warm demander when I'm implementing this activity? So it just really covers all of those instructional decisions. And then on the student level, I just see it, what I see is that students are finding all kinds of ways to show their brilliance. And teachers are finding ways to acknowledge and recognize that brilliance.
Yeah, truly seeing what they can do in the mathematics classroom, right? And like you said, through the lens of that versus it being in a statement or, just this is what, isn't on a wall somewhere, but then really seeing those principles put into action. So what the question I always get, and so I always ask as well, is where do leaders, educators, teachers, where do they get started in terms of the framework? Where, like, not just choosing the one principle, but yeah, how do they get started?
Kyndall, you want to start?
Well, I mean, I guess they start by reading the book, and I would encourage teachers to read it collaboratively, do a book study with other professional colleagues, hopefully at your same school, if not, within the same district or whatever you need to do in the COVID era, so that you can have someone to have conversations with about the book. At the end of each chapter, we have discussion questions. And in each chapter, we have different kinds of activities that they can actually try in their classrooms. And then, have this come back, bring student work, have discussions about, right? So, and I guess I would kind of, the easiest place to start would be one chapter at a time, and it just kind of depends. The teachers, I guess, would need to do their own kind of needs assessment to see what's the best place for them to start. But those are my thoughts.
Yeah, and I think that I don't know that there is a best place to start. You just have to start. I mean, I think if people pick up our book and are trying to make a difference for their kids, they're already engaging in some kind of critical consciousness, which is identifying how negative stereotypes impact your kids. So it's making that choice. So I'm going to assume that if they're wanting to start this work, they've already recognized, oh, well, there's some inequity that's in my organization, within my sphere of influence, and I want to do something about it. I don't think you can begin this work without some level of critical consciousness. But beyond that, I just believe you have to start doing something, whether it's creating an action plan, and with that action plan, giving someone permission to hold you accountable. Schools are pressure cookers. There's never enough time to do anything. And if you do not time activate an action and say, hey, hold me accountable or ask me how this went, chances are oftentimes it just doesn't get done. So I agree with all those things that Kyndall said. I just think you have to start by doing something and taking baby steps. And as you take those baby steps, then you'll end up taking bigger steps bit by bit. But you have to start by doing something.
I love that. Just start, and start with a buddy. It's just so that you can have conversations around the principles, around the stories that you're reading and choosing to see. Thank you so much, Pam. Thank you so much, Kyndall, for joining me and sharing so much about choosing to see. I really appreciate talking with you.
Well, thank you.
Thank
We
you
really enjoyed this.
for having me. Yes, this
Absolutely,
is
absolutely.
wonderful.
All right, I hope to see you all soon in person, as safely and as soon as we can. So take care.